But first, I wanted to return to the subject of Egypt and what I described as possibly the death of the Arab Spring. Funnily enough, not many people agreed with me on that. Most people seem to be much more optimistic than I am about the future of Egypt. Let's talk to Nabila Ramdani, Middle East commentator and journalist, who joins us now. Nabila, good evening.
Good evening.
Now, the events in Egypt today, and indeed the last few weeks, I think we can probably all agree are very worrying. This terrible death today of the Sky News cameraman. We know that the Egyptian government is saying that 80 protesters were killed today. The Muslim Brotherhood is saying more than 500. A very dark day for Egypt. But how do you see the future?
Well, it's a very dark day indeed, and it's a horrendously sinister development. And dare I say, that kind of massacres have become routine. It's the third massacre since the beginning of July, when the democratically elected President Mohamed Morsi was deposed, which started protests across the country, mainly organized by his supporters and Muslim Brotherhood supporters. And you're quite right to, hint at the effect it has on the Arab Spring in general, because the situation is totally against the spirit of the Arab Spring. And remember that Egypt was a country which became the focal point of pro-democracy revolutions in the Arab world, with Tahrir Square capturing the imagination of the entire world. And now it's the country is descending into chaos, with two deeply entrenched camps and indeed historical rivals fighting each other. The Muslim Brotherhood and their supporters feel they've been let down by the democratic process after the democratically elected president was deposed by a coup, and they are determined to reinstate the president and end army rule. But on the other hand, the army is reluctant to hand over power to a civilian government and is pursuing its crackdown on pro-Morsi supporters and in the most ruthless and brutal fashion, as illustrated by today's massacre.
What do we make of the fact that Mohamed El-Baradei has resigned as vice president today? He said he can't support the actions being undertaken by the military government. What conclusion should we draw?
I think it's quite a noble gesture, and one which will be welcomed by Democrats, of effectively a member of the government not sanctioning that kind of the use of extreme violence by an army against its own people, when the number one duty of any army in any country is indeed the protection of civilian lives. But I'm afraid it's going to be a largely tokenistic gesture and of no significant importance in the large scheme of things, where even though you have an interim government which has been handpicked by the army in place at the moment, the army is very much in charge of the country. And in the short term, we are unlikely to see any hope of democracy in Egypt as long as you have the army in a position not only able to eradicate the results of democratic elections, but also to carry out routine murders.
I mean, they have said they want to restore democracy, but it seems to me that it's going to take a very long time for that to happen.
Yes, indeed. And the imposition of state emergency and indeed curfews is likely, in fact, to grant the army further powers. And indeed, it will mean that fundamental rights, like the right to protest, will be taken away from demonstrators who are protesting precisely against, military rule. But what needs to happen in the long term is to allow free and fair elections, but more crucially, for the country to stick to the result of free and fair elections and to come to terms with those results. So effectively creating a culture of democracy. But that's, of course, going to be a huge challenge for a country just emerging from 30 years of dictatorship, with the army always looming in the background.
Well, Nabila, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's Nabila Ramdani, Middle East commentator and journalist. It has been a terrible day. And of course, our thoughts are with the family of Mick Dean, the Sky News cameraman who was killed during these protests while filming earlier today in Cairo. A terrible day. And our thoughts also go to his colleagues at Sky News. It's